Hello and welcome to Real Obscure. My name is Kevin H. Shaw, and in tonight's episode we're travelling back to a more primitive time, the early 1970s to be precise, to discuss a movie featuring cavemen, dinosaurs and cable-knit sweaters. From 1974, it's the prehistoric adventure movie The Land That Time Forgot. The Land That Time Forgot is based on the novel of the same name, penned by Edgar Burroughs in 1918. Now, if you're not familiar with the name, you will certainly know of his works. As well as penning 2 sequels to this novel, he also wrote 7 novels in his Pellucidar series, which began with At the Earth's Core, 11 novels set on Mars for his Barsoom series, 5 stories set on Venus for his Atmore stories, and 24 novels featuring his most famous character, Tarzan the Ape Man. He also wrote scores of additional stories, including historical fiction, western and adventure tales, with a total of close to 80 novels to his credit. George R.R. Martin, take note. The movie adaptation was penned by James CAWTHORN and Michael Moorcock. Yes, that Michael Moorcock, the author of sci-fi, fantasy and adventure stories, who is probably most famous for his Eternal Champions series of interconnected tales, featuring various characters who are all aspects or versions of this dimension-spanning entity, including Jerry Cornelius, Hawkmoon and Elric. Fans of Half Man Half Biscuit may also recall him getting name-checked in their song Dickie Davies' Eyes. James CAWTHORN was a long-time collaborator with Moorcock. He worked with him both as an illustrator of his tales and also as a writing partner, penning a number of novels and short stories with him. CAWTHORN was also from GATESHEAD, and fun fact, I used to work there many years ago. The adaptation was a joint US-UK production, with the British end of the deal being handled by Amicus Productions. Amicus was one of Hammer's biggest rivals back in the golden age of British horror in the 60s and 70s. Where Hammer tended to lean into the gothic, Amicus instead generally made movies with a contemporary setting, and they often took the form of anthologies, inspired by the classic Dead of Night from 1945, which I covered in an episode a few months back. These movies included Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, The House That Dripped Blood, Torture Garden, and 2 adaptations of EC Comics stories for Tales from the Crypt and The Vault of Horror. They also produced 2 Doctor Who movies starring Peter Cushing and 2 science fiction movies, The Terranauts and They Came From Beyond Space. Starting in the early 70s, they produced a series of movies based on the works of Edgar Rice Burroughs, with The Land That Time Forgot being the first. The movie was directed by Kevin Connor, whose directorial debut, From Beyond the Grave, was one of the aforementioned Amicus anthologies, and it's also my personal favourite. He directed The Land That Time Forgot, plus its sequel, The People That Time Forgot, At the Earth's Core, and the not an Edgar Rice Burroughs movie but it feels like it anyway flick, Warlords of Atlantis. He is probably best known to US horror fans as the director of Motel Hell, and he also helmed the weirdly forgotten but then remembered when people are reminded of it TV miniseries Goliath Awaits. It's the one with the sunken ship and the bow people. As for the cast, well, we'll get to them in a moment once we set up the movie's premise. So, what's it all about? The movie opens in a mysterious fashion. We see a small cylindrical container being hurled from a cliff and into the sea. As we follow its progress, the titles run, set to the stirring theme tune by Douglas Gamley. An Australian composer, he scored a number of movies for Amicus, including Asylum, Tales from the Crypt, and The Vault of Horror. Eventually the container is washed ashore, and when it's opened, we find within is a handwritten account of a strange adventure, which the movie then proceeds to recount. The tale begins with the sinking of a ship during World War I by a U-boat crew led by Captain von Schoenvoerts. However, some of the passengers, the American engineer Tyler Bowen and British biologist Lisa Clayton, are rescued by the surviving crew of the ship, and together they're able to overpower the crew of the U-boat when it surfaces. Bowen seizes command, but when the crewman Dietz destroys the radio, he soon realises their original plan to surrender the vessel to the British is impossible. Bowen is played by Doug McClure. He had a long and successful career in cinema and television, appearing in a number of TV shows, including the long-running roles of Trampus in The Virginian and Kyle Applegate in the sci-fi sitcom Out of This World. He made a number of TV movies, including Turret in the Sky, which was a remake of 0 Hour, the movie later parodied in Airplane, and Satan's Triangle, plus features including Shenandoah, Gidget, the aforementioned At the Earth's Core and the Land That Time Forgot sequel, The People That Time Forgot, and The House of Evil, which was directed by this movie's Kevin Connor. And yes, he was also the inspiration for The Simpsons character Troy McClure. Lisa is played by Susan Penn Halligan. Hailed as the British Bardo, her movie career began in the early 70s, with an appearance in the 1972 adaptation of Dylan Thomas's Under Milk Wood bringing her to the public eye. She later went on to appear in such movies as the comedy No Sex Please We're British, starring the brilliant Ronnie Corbett, The House of Mortal Sin, directed by Pete Walker, the cat-themed horror anthology The Uncanny, and as Lucy Westenra in the BBC adaptation of Bram Stoker's novel Count Dracula. And like every British actor at the time, she also appeared in Doctor Who. She continues to act to this day, appearing mostly now in television dramas, but did appear in Mark Gatiss' ghostly tale The Dead Room, thus continuing her work in genre fiction. Von Schoenvoerts is played by British actor and playwright John McEnery. Moving from a theatrical background to film in the late 60s, he was nominated for a BAFTA for his role in Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet, and carved a successful career in movies, appearing in such titles as Ridley Scott's The Duelist, 1990's Hamlet, and another of Pete Walker's movies, Schizo. Keith Barron plays the role of Bradley, commander of the British crew. Barron appeared in a number of TV and movie roles, but is probably best known to UK audiences for his long-running role in the sitcom Duty Free. He also worked extensively as a voiceover artist, lending his vocal talents to a number of commercials and the hugely atmospheric West Country Tales series for the BBC. And like every British actor of the time, he also appeared in Doctor Who. Dietz is played by Anthony Ainley. Ainley had a successful career in TV guest roles, appearing in such genre shows as The Avengers, Department S, Doomwatch and Out of the Unknown, and a recurring role in the detective show It's Dark Outside, taking over from his co-star in this movie, Keith Barron, when he left the series. Fans of folk horror will also recognise him for his portrayal of Reverend Fallowfield in The Blood on Satan's Claw. And like every British actor of the time, he also appeared in Doctor Who. A lot, as his portrayal of the Master saw him portraying the villainous Time Lord for 6 years, which to this day is the longest running performance by the same actor. The remainder of the two crews are played by a number of character actors and well recognised faces, including Godfrey James, Declan Mulholland, Roy Holder, Andrew McCulloch, Ron Pember, Brian Hall, and Peter Sproul. Anyway, back to the plot. When their compass is sabotaged by Dietz and the crew find themselves off course, heading south rather than west, they discover a frozen, uncharted continent, which von Schoenvoerts theorises is the continent of Caprona. Following the discovery of palm leaves in the water, they realise an underground river, running beneath the ice wall, could be their entry point to this lost continent. Diving, they navigate the underground strait, emerging to find themselves in a tropical world populated by long-extinct creatures, including Neanderthal-like humans and dinosaurs. Discovering, with the help of a friendly caveman, that there are deposits of crude oil on Caprona, both crews form a temporary alliance. Their goal being to refine enough oil to refuel the U-boat, thus allowing them to return to civilization. However, before they can do that, they must contend with flesh-eating dinosaurs, less than friendly primitive locals, and, most dangerous of all, the rising hostilities between the two factions of wartime enemies. Will they succeed, or will Caprona claim them as its own? Well, let's find out as we enter the spoiler zone. Lisa and von Schauwert discover that the water of Caprona is teeming with life, and as they explore further inland they discover creatures that should, by history's normal standards, be divided by thousands, if not millions of years, yet all somehow coexist here. They're ambushed by a group of cavemen who attack the party as they explore. Fighting them off, they manage to capture one of the party and take him back to their camp. Here they discover his name is Arm, and he is a member of a race called the Bolu. He proves to be a curious and friendly sort, and quickly becomes their guide to the strange world of Caprona. Arm is played by Bobby Parr, an actor with a few genre credits, including appearing in an episode of Adam Adamant Lives, the sequel to this movie The People That Time Forgot, and I Am a Groupie, which was directed by Derek Ford, who we met in the Real Obscure episode covering Blood Tracks. During their conversations with Arm, he explains, through grunting and drawing in the dirt, that he will evolve into a Storlu and then a Garlu, or Homo sapien, a change which von Schauwert attributes to a belief in reincarnation, but Lisa, somehow, correctly deduces this is a physical change. Now, I have to admit that whilst I've read a lot of Edgar Rice Burroughs, I've never read the Caprona novels, and perhaps it's better explained in the books, but the movie does sort of gloss over this a little. Whilst later Arm does indeed go off with a tribe of more evolved people and does become more developed, quite how this process works isn't really explained. There's a sequence that sees the women laying their eggs in the water of Caprona's river network, and that they somehow interact with the life that's teeming in the waters to evolve into higher entities because Caprona is always moving forward or something. It's all very vague, and given that Burroughs has some unique ideas about reproduction and ovulation, both here and in the Barsoom series, well, I'm guessing we're just supposed to nod and move on. And so move on we shall. The two crews are able to work together for a time, but tensions still remain. When Bowen and the majority of the British crew are off on an expedition, they're attacked by the Storlu, who capture Lisa. Arm, however, having left Bowen and his party during the night, is now with this group, but when a pterodactyl attacks, he tries to save his friend Bowen and is swooped up in its jaws. Bowen fights off the Storlu and then later Garlu, including fighting in quicksand because 1970s, and is able to save Lisa as a series of volcanic eruptions burst into life. Meanwhile, back at their camp, Dietz leads a mutiny when von Schauwert refuses to acknowledge the danger posed by the eruptions and will not leave without Bowen and the rest of the British crew. Shooting both Bradley and his captain, Dietz sends both wounded men below deck before ordering the U-boat to dive. However, the waters of the river have begun to boil due to the volcanic activity, and, as the submarine submerges, the crew are roasted alive within before it explodes. Bowen and Lisa watch from the shore as the vessel is destroyed, and realising their only hope is to keep moving forward, they head deeper into the continent of Caprona. Bowen explains in a voiceover that they would rather be here together than elsewhere apart, and that they are going to continue heading northward until they solve the mystery of this land that time forgot. We see the pair, wrapped in furs, as they place a rolled up document into a container, which they then hurl from the cliffs and into the sea, bookending the movie as the titles roll. Now, I have to add a brief disclaimer here. The Land That Time Forgot was the first movie I ever saw at the cinema. Yes, I am that old. And so seeing all these incredible dinosaur scenes on the big screen was probably as impactful as seeing Jurassic Park was for people who aren't ancient like me. Except that The Land That Time Forgot isn't boring and filled with stupid idiot people who solve every problem just by being lucky. Yeah, don't even get me started on how much I hate Jurassic Park. Anyway, this film was, as I say, the first movie that I saw on the big screen, and it's hard to understate the impact this movie had on me. It was only a few years later when I saw Star Wars that I was so equally inspired and filled with awe. Like most kids, I was obsessed with dinosaurs, so seeing them moving around and eating people was just an amazing experience for me. So much so that when the movie was over, I begged my parents to buy me one of the toy pterodactyls that they had for sale in the foyer. Yes, movie theatres also used to sell tie-in merchandise for the movies they showed. Probably made from lead, and we chewed on them whilst drinking water from the garden hose. So anyway, this is a movie I have a particular soft spot for, and I would always watch it whenever it was shown as part of the Bank Holidays TV programming in the UK. But of course this begs the question, do I still enjoy the movie when I watch it as an adult? And the answer is yes, but you see, as I've grown older I've come to appreciate movies in a different manner. As a kid it's about spectacle, the story and the action, and whilst the movie still stands up in those areas, mostly, I watch it in a different way as an adult. I've mentioned before that I'm a big fan of practical effects. As much as I appreciate that digital effects have unlocked a new era of visuals and that we can now essentially envisage anything that we can imagine, that ability doesn't always translate as well as it could. Just as earlier special effects had their drawbacks, like mismatched lighting in composited scenes, fuzzy outlines on chroma key or blue screen effects and so on, so too a lot of digital effects can have their drawbacks. Even something as recent as Predator Badland had a few moments of floaty athletics, and it just kind of throws you off when you see these things. And so it's with the eyes of an effects fan that I appreciate the work that went into this movie. The decision was made early on in production to use puppets for the dinosaur effects rather than stop frame animation, as it was felt that puppets would lend a smoother and more natural feel to the dinosaurs. And whilst yes, the giant reptiles are clearly miniatures, there's both a charm and an appreciation for the way they're implemented. And then we have the pterodactyl, a life-size model suspended by wires and moved using a massive rig. It's an incredibly impressive piece of fabrication, and whilst yes, it's really little more than a giant plastic toy being hoisted around with a snapping jaw being its only animation, it glides and doesn't flap its wings, it's still a fantastic combination of effects and stunt work. There's also the fact that the actors are in an actual environment and not just filmed against a green screen background for many scenes. The characters have to step over roots and push through jungle, contend with splashing through water, and even run past exploding gouts of flame. Again, it gives it a more grounded feel, and yes, it's a story about people encountering dinosaurs, but it just has a more realistic feel than many modern movies do. And that's something I can appreciate and would encourage others to consider. The performances are all fine, exactly what you'd expect from a 1970s action movie, and the dialogue, Capronian evolution aside, is perfectly acceptable. This is very much the kind of popcorn adventure or monster action movie where you're not here for moving monologues or explorations of the human condition. And the story itself is relatively simple, but it whips along at a decent pace. It takes about 30 minutes before we even see a dinosaur, but there's enough going on with the movie's real-world sequences that it really doesn't feel that way. And yes, maybe there's one too many mutinies, and the switching back and forth of command of the U-boat by both factions does seem a little overlong. The Mystery Science Theatre 3000 edition of the movie actually cuts this down. But I'm sure this is all from the novel, and as Edgar Rice Burroughs was writing adventure stories that just happen to also have fantastical elements, I think we can forgive it. Kevin Connor went on to direct another Edgar Rice Burroughs adaptation, At the Earth's Core, which also starred McClure, this time alongside horror icon Peter Cushing. Like the Caprona series, this movie is again a fantasy adventure, replacing cavemen with the orc-like Sagoths and adding a strange race of winged sentient reptiles, the Mehar. And it also has kind of dinosaurs in it, and Caroline Munro in not a lot of clothing, sweating a lot. Maybe I should take another look at that movie again. To do an episode on it, I mean. Yeah, not for any other particular reasons. Sorry, where was I? Yeah, Kevin Connor. He later followed up this movie with a direct sequel, The People That Time Forgot, which, much like Beneath the Planet of the Apes, introduces new protagonists in search of the first movie's lost lead. Although not as dino-centric as the original, it does introduce some cool new ideas, and whilst it's not as good a movie, it's still worth watching and features appearances from Sarah Douglas of Superman 2 fame and Patrick Wayne, who starred in Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, which I covered in an earlier episode. Sadly, this was the last movie made by Amicus, as the company fell into bankruptcy, although producer Milton Subotsky did provide a few final thrills for Amicus anthology fans in the form of 1977's The Uncanny, 1980's The Monster Club, and the 1985 adaptation of Stephen King's short stories, Cat's Eye. The Land That Time Forgot has been adapted for the screen a further 2 times, and there have been more Tarzan movies, TV shows, cartoons and serials than I can be bothered to count. But perhaps the most high-profile adaptation of Edgar Rice Burroughs' work came in 2012 when Disney adapted the first of his Barsoom novels, A Princess of Mars, and then for some utterly baffling reason released it as simply John Carter, and not John Carter of Mars as the stories are often known. And then they were surprised when it went on to become one of the biggest box office failures in movie history. But that's a story for another time. And on that note, thanks for listening, and I'll see you all on the next episode of Real Obscure. This episode of Real Obscure was written, produced and Borloo by me, Kevin H. Shaw. If you enjoyed this episode, then please be sure to like, share and subscribe, and remember to turn on notifications so you never miss another episode. You can help support the show by using the thanks option on each video to make a one-off financial donation. Sharing the video to your social media is also a great way to help the show grow. Your comments are always welcome, and you can also share your thoughts by emailing hellorealobscure@gmail.com. You can also visit our website at realobscurepod.com, and I'm on Blue Sky using the handle @realobscurepod. The Land That Time Forgot is copyright 1974. All content here is used for educational and commentary purposes under Section 107 of the Copyright Act, Fair Use, and remains the property of the respective copyright holders. Presented here for the purposes of critique, commentary and discussion. No copyright infringement is intended, so please don't sue me or feed me to a giant pterodactyl.